Gotcha.
Hello everybody and welcome to my weekly report on weapon popularity in Monster Hunter World. This is the first time that I've made a video of this type, and basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the weapon's ranking as well as the percentage of the population that uses it. It's very straightforward. Now, I was doing some testing with a friend and it looks like the Xbox and the PlayStation get different popularity stats, if you want to say that. What I'm suggesting is it appears that Capcom splits up the player base per console. Now, the reason we were testing for this is just to see if it would be different, and it looks like we actually ran into a bug. So when he went and he checked the greatsword, he was told that the weapon was number 2, but also that it was the least popular in the game, or based on the Wyverian's own words, he said, few people choose the greatsword, but then your weapon, the popularity for it is 2. It doesn't make any sense. And then it said that only 1% of the population uses the greatsword, and then he tried another weapon, and he got kind of similar results. The popularity for the weapon was high, but then he claims only 1% of the population uses that weapon. So the first Wyverian on the PlayStation 4, we're pretty sure he's bugged right now. So we'll only be looking at the weapon popularity for the Xbox, and then we'll try again next week to see if we can get it working. Alright, so let's get started. Coming in last place, we have the hunting horn. Once again, the hunting horn isn't always in last place, but it usually is. It is in last place with only 1%. This kind of surprised me because in the big update, the Devil Joe update, the hunting horns actually got a pretty substantial buff. They have a buff that only applies to them. I'm talking about their in-game buffs. I'm not talking about what Capcom gave them. They have an in-game buff called a self-improvement. And so what Capcom did was they didn't do it very visually, like you can't tell that it's there, but they gave all of the hunting horns an attack up self-improvement buff that was actually pretty large. So it's kind of strange. You have this weapon called the hunting horn that nearly does the damage of a hammer, but also gives everyone on the team really powerful buffs, and it's like the least popular weapon in the game. It no longer really makes sense to me. Before, I felt like hunting horns were kind of weak, so it made more sense, but now it just doesn't make as much sense. Okay, so moving on. In 13th place, we have the lance with only 2% for the population. I can understand this a little more. The lance, it's not a bad weapon by any means. It's also not a very exciting weapon. The lance was the first weapon I ever used in this game, which also makes it the first weapon I've ever used in any Monster Hunter game, because this is my first one, like some of you out there. And yeah, it said that this would be kind of a difficult weapon to use. I didn't find it that difficult. I thought it was very straightforward. And, you just pick the strongest one and you're done. There's a number of weapons like that in this game, with the very similar concept of just picking the strongest one, learning a couple of its combinations, and you're set. Alright, moving on. In 12th place, we have the light bowgun, and the light bowgun only has 3% of the population. Now, right after that, you have the heavy bowgun. It comes in at number 11 with 3% of the population, so they're right next to each other, and I'm not too surprised by that either. I actually find them both really powerful, light bowgun and heavy bowgun. The problem with them is that you kind of need a lot of end-game gear in order to get the most out of them. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to be spamming the most powerful ammo, you gotta kind of have some of that ammo stocked up, and that costs money or time. If you want to use the best armor sets with them, well, the best armor sets for those weapons are kind of like the most expensive armor sets to accomplish as well. Same with the decorations. Some of the decorations you'll want, they're pretty hard to accomplish to actually get a hold of. And without the right setup, I don't feel like the bowguns feel that powerful. So having them lower on the list, I think part of it's an issue of players don't really get good access to them until later. You know what I mean? Alright, coming in at 10th place, we have the gun lance with only 3% of the population. Now, I can't speak too much about the gun lance. I've only built one of them, and I thought it was alright. I don't want to trash talk any of the weapons on the list. That's not the point of this video. But as I mentioned before, I actually started the game with the lance. So anytime I need kind of like a long-range weapon and a shield, I just go straight for the lance. And that doesn't mean I haven't played around with the gun lance, but I wasn't a big fan of the fact that the gun lance doesn't have the charging attack where he runs forward. I love that about the lance. It gives the lance a lot of maneuverability and allows it to use a jump attack which deals mount damage. So my preference is just toward the lance, but I probably just need more time to see what's good about the gun lance. Maybe gun lance does more damage, right? After the gun lance, we have the sword and shield at 3% in 9th place. I was kind of surprised to see that there. You know, I've never really thought poorly of the sword and shield. You have a lot of different options. I think people get the impression it doesn't do very good damage, but I've always thought that the sword and shield is totally capable of doing damage, as well as being better than any of the other weapons at using items, including being able to use the wide range skill. So it's not a bad weapon by any means. But it still kind of has that drop off of only having 3% of the population. You know, gun lance had 3, heavy bowgun had 3, light bowgun had 3, lance had 2, right? So I imagine these are all pretty close to each other, and it's just a little disappointing, especially because Eric's had just released a guide for the sword and shield. I would imagine that the weapon would have received kind of a boost in its popularity, you know, following that video, but I don't know, I guess not. Alright, we're kind of moving on to the weapons that fall right in the middle of the pack. We have the switch axe. He comes in at rank 8 with 7% of the population. The hammer comes in rank 7 with 8% of the population. Greatsword comes in rank 6 with 9% of the population. These are pretty terrific weapons in my opinion. I feel like they're especially decent for players who maybe they don't have all the decorations they need. I mean, obviously with any weapon, having ideal armor and ideal decorations is really important for optimizing your build, but I mean, come on, like with the hammer, it's not that complicated, is it? You know, you just go in, hit the monster on the head, you have very few combos to think about, and that's what makes it fun. You know, you don't have to overthink what you're doing, you just go in and play. Similar to the greatsword, you know, you're trying to get those draw attacks on the monster's head, and if you're really skilled, you get all of those lined up perfectly. That's especially hard in multiplayer, I'm sure, but they fall in probably where you would want most of the weapons in the game to actually fall into. So nothing to say about them really. And finally, we have our top 4 weapons in the game. None of these should sound surprising. You have in 4th place the Insect Glaive, holding 12% of the population. That guy is real popular, but I noticed he's fallen down a few ranks since the last time I saw all of the weapon popularities in the game. In 3rd place, we have the Dual Blades, holding 12% of the population. In 2nd place, we have the Bow, holding 13% of the population. And in 1st place, we have the longsword, just barely holding on to it with 13%. So the bow and the longsword are pretty much tied with 13%. I'm sure it's just kind of a fractional amount that makes them different. So yeah, the bow's been really popular in this game. I don't think there's many fights I get into where I don't run into a bow user. In fact, I'm surprised that the bow's not in 1st place as opposed to the longsword. But you know, I play a lot of multiplayer. There could be a lot of people doing single player with the longsword. When it comes to multiplayer, you just see bows all the time, just left and right. So tell me why you guys think those weapons are so popular right now. Are they too strong? Are the weapons at the bottom of the list too weak? I don't really think so. I've used all of the weapons in the game at this point. I haven't mastered all of the weapons in the game. That's very different. But I can tell you, I've actually used the hunting horns, all of them, a lot. And there are some crazy strong hunting horns. So it's actually kind of shocking to see the hunting horns only being used by 1% of the population. And I don't know what to tell you guys. It's even great if you're starting out in the game because you get defensive buffs that keep you alive. You get offensive buffs that mean you can have your team carry you. I mean, you got a lot of options with the hunting horns. The lances, again, a little more understandable. I want to call them not as exciting as the other weapons, but they get the job done, right? They're very good at positioning and staying alive, obviously, severing monster parts, and their damage output is fine, I would guess. The light bowgun and the heavy bowgun, they didn't get any kind of buff with the Devil Joe update, but they didn't need a buff, honestly. They're already really strong. Again, I think their only problem is just that you need a lot of good endgame gear in order to use them. Alright, and that is my weekly weapon popularity update. Next week, when I do it again, I'll have my friend help me once again take a look on the PlayStation 4, see if that bug is still around, see if the first Wyverian is making any sense when he talks about popularity on the PlayStation 4, and when we do that, we'll be able to see if PlayStation 4 really does get a separate player base that they base their popularity and their statistics around, or if the Xbox and the PlayStation are actually the same. We'll have to see. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
Really? Oh my gosh, you guys! I just want to thank y'all so much!